Hello, Data Storytellers. Today I'm here with Jodi Blomberg, who is the VP Data Science over at Cox Automotive. Great to have you with us, Jodi.
Well, thank you for having me.
And yeah, you've been working with our community for a good number of years now. And today we had some good conversations, and we're going to dive into the particulars around selling data and business process change and your playbook around that. So just to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to your current role.
Sure. I have always worked in data science, and I'm lucky to say so. I think it's the funnest job around. I was at SAS for a long time, which is a software company. And then I moved in-house at Charles Schwab, so really focused on the customer omnichannel journey across branch, digital properties, and the conversational AI piece of that. And then I moved to waste management, which was wildly different. So the focus is on, so I think there's a lot of physical infrastructure. There are landfills, there are trucks, there are drivers, there are all of these, very physical infrastructure and physical product things you're trying to affect with data science, which is really different than digital. I landed at Cox Automotive, where I built both. So it's a family of companies with digital properties like dealer.com, or think of KBB, but it also has a lot of fleet and operations and runs car auctions and has a little bit of that. I think that kind of gives me, I'm firmly convinced that the most fun problems and the future problems are going to be in that physical space. Right, not that we're done with digital space, but recommender engines are pretty common, for example, or things that you can deploy into digital property or sell or ads. And I think there's this whole untouched land of stuff that's going to come out of fleet infrastructure, out of routing, out of just touching jobs that have previously been technology free. So I love that space. And part of this playbook is about how different that space is from, I think, deploying a model in a digital company.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And actually having those experiences and your foot in both of those camps, you must have a very, as you kind of alluded to there, when you move to waste management, vastly different. Now with the, large output of AI and ChatGPT and companies now spearheading this, how do you see that landscape forming over the next few years?
Well, any prediction I make about Gen AI will probably not be true about 14 seconds after I say it, but it's moving really fast. However, I do think this idea of augmenting humans, whether that is through Gen AI or what I call traditional machine learning, or how we use computer vision to augment jobs that have traditionally been done by humans, is definitely something that's coming or is already here in some cases. I think the current more compelling use cases will be about efficiency and what do I mean by that? Not so much about getting rid of, canceling jobs, but making some of those jobs that we struggle to hire for. Think about a truck mechanic. Those are hard to hire experienced truck mechanics. Well, how can we use technology to make the new ones that we hire better? How can we make an inspector better? Because they don't have those skills yet. How can we use technology and AI to upskill and automate something so they can focus on the higher value work that still requires human judgment? That's my guess how this is going to pan out. I think the ROI in Gen AI, I think the hype currently exceeds the ROI. I think that will change. We're all in an experimentation phase, and it will definitely make us all more efficient. But I think there's plenty of room left for human judgment, and there's also plenty of room left for machine learning on tabular data that makes money. It's just printing money all over town right now, and will continue to do so.
Mm-hmm. And it's super interesting, even seeing the landscape as a from a layperson perspective. To give you an example, in the UK, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak just sat down with Elon Musk and had like a big long interview about AI and the possibility. And this is just something that's kind of unprecedented in the space. And I like to use that example because it's kind of a microcosm for what's happening in businesses. And, the same as digital transformation, the same as IoT and all of these things that come and go. But AI is kind of here, and it's here to stay. You mentioned before that this is really about how you use AI to implement digital solutions to companies with physical products, kind of what we're going to talk about today, and actually as you said, the efficiency, making those operational infrastructures more optimized, right? So when it comes to the elements of that, well, let's break that down. We're obviously the data storytellers here, so we're going to be talking about the people side of things. But first of all, where do you see the kind of the platform side and the process side in these companies playing that role to kind of get started?
You mean on solving these kind of problems?
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, the thing about some of these automation problems in physical spaces, so think about anything from routing a truck or putting, IoT sensors on a landfill or IoT sensors on a truck. We're getting a huge amount of telematics data from cars these days, right? Most people have either ridden in or now own a car with a huge amount of telemetry on it that's going to be feeding us data. You really need you need sort of, in my mind, you need two qualities before you should ever call me. Like one, you should already have a data strategy to ingest that data, right? And some idea of it's hard for us to do any job without data. So we need a data strategy about how we're going to invest and get all that data. And there are plenty of physical processes out there with generating absolutely no data, where the data is on a binder under someone's desk. So that is a barrier to entry for sure, right? And so thinking too about what data can we buy or start collecting in order to get to a place. So there has to be some process and people, there has to be data that exists on that process or that we think we can get. The second, though, is what makes these problems, I think, so much more interesting, but so much harder, is you need this really high willingness on the business. Because there is really, really big difference between deploying a model onto a digital property or onto a digital assistant. You can see the results tomorrow, right? That thing gets deployed at these tests, goes into prod, and if Amazon released their recommendation engine tomorrow, they will start making money tomorrow. If you release a model to make a mechanic better or create more work orders or even automate something in a call center, you're now very reliant that some human being on the front line is going to take that output in the way that you intended and become more efficient or use that in a way that makes us make more money or save costs. You're highly dependent on the human component of a worker. And that is just harder. The tail is much longer. So I want, we often educate business partners about, yes, they come and they want to do cool AI. And then I say, oh, but you have such a big responsibility to do this with me, right? They have to push a lot of change to the front line.
Mm-hmm. So much to go on there. I'm just taking a bunch of notes here. Like, for example, the process is actually being the barrier to entry. This is the $1 million question, right? Because I'm sure, when you were at Waste Management, this is something you were working on all the time. And Cox, like, come over here. Let now do that here. So I guess in the first few months of the role, what kind of barriers are you seeing and how are you looking to circumvent those?
I have definitely, like I said, I have seen barriers to entry on data where people say, we literally don't collect that data, or that person has never interacted with that, or what is happening in this process is in a Drew and binder in that guy's desk out in the field. That's a hard one. Sometimes you can buy data. I'd also say sometimes we can create data. So just to be fair, there are ways to use AI to create data from imagery or from text that we do have access to and create more structured data that we can use. So one barrier often can be in processes not previously that have been incredibly human driven and not tech driven, means there may not be data at all. Sometimes we can around that. Sometimes it's around setting up a data plan. I think the second barrier, though, too, is the underestimation of how hard it will be. I think it's such well-meaning, and I have the same problem. It is so fun to think like, oh, we're going to build this model and we're going to, change the world. And you very, very well change the world. But really having to be thoughtful about how long that's going to take, how invested you're going to need to be, how much education you might have to do to get you there, because you are not working at a FANG, you are not at Amazon, you are not at Facebook. But that's what the companies that people hear about. So, like I said, I think it's way more interesting to be in this space because it is untouched. A lot of stuff that you're going to do, you're going to be the first person to do it. But that also means like you have a lot of politics and a lot of business process to wade through. So.
Perfect stuff. So there's that underestimation from the data team. That's one barrier to entry. What's kind of the flip side of that? Like, what are the barriers you see on the business side of things where they're kind of more resistant? They're not doing it in maybe the way that was expected. What kind of barriers are you seeing there?
Well, there's so many. This is actually why I make my data scientists, I believe, a good prerequisite for working on a problem of this nature, especially in a physical product, is they need to ride the truck or sit behind the call center person or walk the landfill or whatever it is, go to a car auction, like, because the issues are paramount. There will be so many that you haven't thought of, right? Because it all sounds easy when you're looking at the data, but remember, we probably don't have data on every part of the process. So you don't know what you don't know. Like, oh, I'll go send them over here, but well, no, they have to take lunch right then, right? There's union contracts. There's often a manager coaching and discretion that's happening in the way these people do work that is not captured by data. And the only way you're going to learn that is by going and getting your front seat. The business already knows all that stuff. So often they're resistant because they're like, this is just too hard. Like, this is so complicated. It's so reliant on people's good judgment or, discretion. Like, how will we ever automate that? Often the way that I describe it is, or the ideal situation for us is if you have a group of human employees and you have some that have been there a long time, high tenure, what we're really trying to do is make the person who walks in the door to start that job tomorrow we can't make it as good as that person, but we can give them, one step up to being like a more experienced employee. And that's where usually we can create content, data, predictions, recommendations, right? That help get that person up leveled as quickly as possible, like get from a symptom to a suggested repair as quickly as possible, right? So that they don't have to wait and learn to be coached. That's usually the way I try to describe it, which is we will not replace the humans in your chain. We're just trying to make all the call agents as good as the best one, right? Or all the mechanics at least half as good as your best one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think it comes from fear, but in reality, it comes from they're almost too busy to do that kind of change, right? They've done it a certain way for a number of years, and actually fighting for that attention is the $1 million ticket. And that's obviously not a platform strategy where a company just throw the money at it. It's not a process issue because those processes are already well established or on the way to be. And really, it's a people issue.
For sure.
So it's really good to speak to you at this time because you've had a bit of time with Cox, right? So you've actually been implementing this playbook on selling data and actually the business process change side of things. So could you just outline some of those points that you make and actually the kind of rules of thumb that you follow in your head?
Sure. I have sort of a standard AI playbook, and it has this one. The Venn diagram is pretty high with it, but I think there's some extras or the way I might deploy a model that's going to be a much more automated digital solution with very little or less human in the loop. Like I said, the first one is always go visit. So maybe my third week here, I was standing at a car auction myself because that is part of our business. So I do it to myself too. There's two reasons to do that, to go visit or go be in the front line. And one is, I call it making friends, but I mean it. The more time you spend on the front line, first of all, you get insight into why that resistance might be so high, right? Like how much people change really is going to have to happen and what is realistic for you to do. You're going to learn things like that doing something minimal might be more effective than trying to tackle the whole thing. The other is that you now have a phone a friend. So we often see weird stuff in our data, right? We don't understand, like, well, I don't know why that one's blank or why did they pass over that part of the process? That person who stands on the front line every day probably can tell you, right? Oh, we skipped that one when John says that X is fine. I don't do Y or whatever, right? Things that are not captured in the data. So you have someone you can sort of get to know your data on, and that is so invaluable. I'd even recruited these frontline people to help me sometimes. Sometimes they are labels and annotators. They know the data better than anyone else, and they know the business better than anyone else. So you don't want to have data scientists annotating mechanic notes. Preferably you have mechanics labeling your notes if you can, but you're going to need to make some friends to do that. So then you need to convince them you're not there to replace your job, right? You're trying to make them better. Ask them, what would make your job easier? That's a good question to start with. So that's the first part of my playbook. The next two are things that are always in my AI playbook or machine learning playbook, which is making sure we understand the business value case for, can we measure it? I don't like to be on the hook for deploying models where no one knows how we're going to measure whether it actually made money. So just working through that. Okay, what if we made this 5 minutes faster? Like, can we put a dollar value on that back of the envelope so we know how much time and effort? At some point, the cost better be lower than the money. And the business hopefully is doing that with you. But if they're not, you need to press them on that, I think. Especially in Gen AI, I really think we are going to have to be much more disciplined about our ROI cases, that the investment matches the output. The one I talk about all the time when I go to do a model, but here is especially important, is I think if you worked in data science long enough, you have met someone who thinks you have a magic wand. And mine has never appeared in the mail. I don't have it. So all models are wrong. I do not have a way to make something right 100% of the time. And so I like to make sure we're very clear with the businesses. We're talking about the people part. We're talking about the process part. What are we going to do when this goes wrong? What are we going to do when it gives you the wrong answer? Are humans checking this? Are we going to lose the trust of those frontline employees if we give them the wrong answer? Like, what's the cost of being wrong? Because we will be wrong, right? And do we want to over-index on one kind of error over the other? That's probably true for any model that you come with. I'm always obsessed with the error. I like to be very upfront with my business partners about how we're going to manage the error even before we start a model, because there will be some. I don't have any models that are right 100% of the time. So in this space, I think it's especially important to figure out if the risk is revenue or reputational, right? What you don't want is people saying, well, that tool's not useful because it gave me the wrong answer. I'm not going to use it anymore. Those are reputation killers. And then I think the last part of my playbook is just to be prepared for how complex and how long of a tail it is. It is so much more than deploying a model. And your responsibility as a data science team, it might be nice to have it end there, but it often doesn't. We've gone so far as to be involved in, if you are forecasting targets or something like that, and you are putting out confidence intervals, we have gone so far as to create training materials and actually train the frontline staff. Like, this is what it means to look at that. And here's when you should take it seriously. Here's when you shouldn't. Or here is how the suggestions are ordered. This is why, and help them understand what we're trying to do and go that far. Sometimes product will do that for you. And sometimes the data science team has to really just pull the long tail to pull everybody with.
Amazing. So specifically then, let's break it down. So the first step is, as you mentioned, is to make friends there, get people on the front line, and get the data scientists, find out the problems, right? So a lot of the data scientists I've met, they don't tend to be the most outgoing people, the most extrovert. The ones I have, by the way, are the ones who tend to be most successful in this space. That's the first thing I'll say. They're the guys who get promoted the quickest. They're the guys who have the most impact on the business. The guys who can stick their foot in both camps. So I imagine that you've inherited this data science team at Cox. So first of all, how are you going about positioning this to the data team and actually pitching it on that side of things?
So fortunately, I don't have to pitch too hard. I've inherited a great team. I prefer to make it part of people's IDP or their development plan, just that you will visit a site in the next year, preferably related to what you work on, but learn another side of the business. So that waste management, that might mean having the computer vision team ride in the truck with the cameras they are building models on, because they learn a lot. Here, that might mean going to a car auction. It might mean, I already have folks who are already proactively visiting the location for a model they're making. So fortunately, it seems like I won't have to sell it. But I heavily encourage it. It's essentially learning about your data generation process or learning where your model is going to go. And there is just no level of translation or requirements or, Kanban board substitute, I think, for seeing the description of what you're trying to solve for firsthand.
Mm-hmm. And with the on the other side of things, then with the stakeholder relationships, then how do you go about making them count? What are the questions that you ask of your stakeholders in order to establish that trustful relationship?
Well, actually, visiting a site is the first step in that. You will ask a smarter question. You will also, that is part of trust gaining. So the other day, I think when I first started at Waste Management, I think I even asked someone when I was on a multi-day site tour of various parts of the business, isn't it sort of annoying how it's here? I'm sorry, right? Like, you trying to do your job and you go, people, have to show how you're doing your job. And, I'm sorry if we're in the way, you just let us know. And they were like, oh no, we are delighted that someone is interested in what we're doing. So I have always found people very open. I think it builds trust with your stakeholders to say, well, I did go stand on the auction, or I did walk the landfill, and here's what I know. And I know I don't know what you know. So the second piece of that for me with business partners in this space is coming in with a huge amount of humility. If you come in and say, I'm going to solve all your problems with AI, you will make no friends. I'm kind of in the business of making friends, right? So I like to come in super humble. If that means sitting and listening to their product meetings for 2 months before you say a word, that's what you do. You come in and try to learn as much as you can so you can run an intelligent conversation. So I like to come in and say, we are the experts, right, in machine learning or AI or whatever part, or computer vision or text, whatever the thing I think we're going to solve for is. You are the experts in your business. This is a joint effort. We are not here to tell you how to tell your employees what to do, or even to tell your employees what to do until you tell us that's okay. But what we can do is help you use the data that you're collecting to make this process better, or this job better, or this faster. And just be really humble about the things that they will tell you, because I guarantee no matter what you think you know, there's 1,000 things you don't know. And so I try to even modulate the way I talk really carefully to not even act like I know what's going on, because I probably don't. Or preface a lot of things with, hey, I visited and I saw this, but I'm sure there's things going on I don't know. What else can you tell me? That I think humility is such a key part of winning the people over, because they have been running these businesses probably for 20 or 30 years just fine without technology. And you got to be careful that you're not suggesting that you're there to save them from something they're doing wrong, right?
Yeah, as you said the word humility, I'd finished writing the word humility. So definitely got that from everything you were saying as well. And specifically going into those meetings from a, not like this power position, but almost from a position of, look, I have X skills, you have Y problem. How do I actually align those and make that equation work? So how do you, for example, when you talk about doing the math, how do you go about asking or identifying the best opportunities and drive those metrics that have the high leverage, the high impact?
I think my more naive self would have gone for high impact every time. And I think my more experienced self now goes for minimal disruption over high impact. So no, I don't want to do things that don't have value. Of course not. But I think in order to win trust, if you can find small ways to make their lives better, to win their trust, that is how you get the trusted partnership to solve the bigger problems. So I'm often asking, we're doing those math questions like, okay, pie in the sky, what's perfect look like, right? Great. Okay. We all think we can't get there, and we can't. But we should know, right? I think having a North Star is really important. Like, what would be perfect? All of this goes automated, goes smoothly. Great. Okay, we're probably going to do that. So let's talk about what would be the easiest thing to do. What would be least disruptive? Like, you wouldn't have to renegotiate a union contract, or you wouldn't have to buy all new technology. We could deliver it on a system they use today, for example, right? We wouldn't have to build a user interface, or we wouldn't have to, maybe we digitize this data and just present it to them. Like, I'm very willing, I think we should all be very willing to do a simpler, nope, we don't get to call it AI then, which is, the shiny word, but we don't get paid to be smart. We get paid to be useful. And so I think finding small ways to be useful is the other way to win trust. The part that I really ask the business a lot about is we are both on the hook at the end of the day to give an ROI to whatever we've done. And so I'm often asking them questions about, okay, we think that will make you more efficient, but how will we know, right? Am I going to see that in a time spent on a task? Am I going to see that in a timesheet? Am I going to see that in that they're happy? Am I going to see that in a survey? Like, how are we all going to, I prefer to set up the performance metrics beforehand if possible, because I want them to have the same skin in the game that I do. So I want to sketch out that math on a whiteboard and say, well, could this be our KPI? Could that be our KPI? So we all agree what we're aiming after too, so we don't accidentally do a maximally disruptive solution chasing value, right? Like, what are the costs associated and how will we measure it? Some business partners are better at that, and some we are leading, and just depends who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. And with the error side of things, so I've got like a it's one question, but it's like a bunch of questions in the question. So bear with me. So we just had a really great podcast with Kate Goodine, who's the head of marketing analytics at Miro. She also used to be the director of data enablement at Expedia. So she shared her playbook on building this culture of experimentation. So you asked some of the right questions. What happens when your model is wrong? First of all, okay, the question is what does happen when the model is wrong? What's the response? How do you deal with that response? But also, you mentioned educating the business. So what is your approach of creating that mindset where failing is not only not an issue, but it's also seen as a step towards success, both to senior leaders, but also to the guys on the ground who have, given you that little bit of trust. Maybe it didn't go as planned, and then you need to kind of go through those next steps.
The reason I'm obsessed with error, honestly, is the model will go wrong. So the first point of education for the business is often to remind them of that. So I have had the business suggest things to me like, oh, what if we automated this? And I say, okay, but if we're wrong, like what, now we've automated something wrong, right? So how do we, and then I think the other part that's super important to feel out of the business is their risk tolerance to be wrong. Some people are fine with a solution that's right 80% of the time, depending on the problem. Some need 99%. I have definitely also abandoned ship on projects who want 99%. If I know we can't get it, let's not do that. If you don't have a risk tolerance to do that, let's not do it. So some of it is, like I said, making sure that we don't automate something we shouldn't be. What's their risk tolerance for being wrong? And then taking that percentage, whatever that might be, and saying, okay, there's two ways in some problem, like classification problem, there's two ways to be wrong, right? I can give you a false positive or I can give you a false negative. For example, let's talk through what that looks like. What does it make you feel? So a lot of times we can come to a solution that says, okay, we're going to augment this. For example, we're going to give the person 3 suggestions and they'll pick which one's good, right? That saves my error, right? From just saying, I'm going to tell them exactly what to do with one thing. So really educating the business that there's also options to manage that error and helping them understand. That might also be, I've also released solutions where we give a confidence level to the prediction. So think about like, where to route a call. Perhaps they only want to auto route something if we are highly confident that that's what the person's talking about. And if we're less confident, maybe we just stick them with a general agent until, we allow the humans to get the clarity on what that customer might want. Maybe saving the automation decisions for only those cases in which we're really sure. So a lot of the education in the business is just helping them understand we will be wrong. Here's ways we can handle that we're going to be wrong. Or here's ways we can give you information to understand how to use the solution correctly when we're not sure of the outcome. Gen AI is going to do this to us as well. For all intents and purposes, it's the same thing to any of our business partners, right? It's a black box solution that is going to give me some stuff and some of it will be wrong. And how will I know? And I'm kind of excited actually in Gen AI that I think there's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of papers coming out to help us get to some of that narrowing to say, here's where I think I'm not going to answer using Gen AI because I'm not sure.
Yeah, anyone who tells you that they are, they're definitely lying.
Well, it's not done, but no, there's definitely some good work. There's definitely good research coming out. I think, I'd like to see how that shakes out in the next year.
Yeah, it would be an interesting time to be living in for sure. So one thing I wanted to touch on there is specifically with teams that have high engagement, as in external teams outside the data team that have the business side of things, that have those high engagement and low engagement, and maybe some of the reasons you've seen for that, why some are lower, whether you've seen any patterns there, whether it's all individualistic and personality based or political maybe, what kind of differences you've seen and why?
Well, it's always political. No, I definitely had, this is where maybe I learned humility. I think if you have a mandate from leadership on their side to do this thing, you get a pretty responsive business partner. I think when you're in experimentation or R&D phase where maybe you're pushing the idea a little bit, or you've maybe sold it to their management, but they kind of want you to see how it's going, they're like, what are these data scientists doing here? Right? Like, I didn't ask for that. Those are the situations where I think the humility aspect is super important to say, hey, can I not just go visit your site or whatever, right? Can I just come to your product meeting or to your planning meeting and I will be the fly on the wall and I will just listen so that you can start to understand what's important to them, because you're going to have to be able to speak their language clearly, right? You are going to need to be able to say why what you are there to do is important to the goal that they are trying to accomplish. So, and that goes back to, again, sometimes doing small things to win their trust. So if you hear just one thing in there where they're like, I really wish I knew X, you can say, hey, why don't we get X for you? Might just be a PowerPoint, might be data analytics, right? Just get your foot in the door. You'll get familiar with the data. It's really a no-lose situation. And try to generally work on that relationship by winning trust and hopefully with data, right? But being super conscious that there are probably a lot of problems they're facing that you cannot solve with data and tech. There's a lot of problems that just have to be solved with the humans on the ground who've been doing it for 30 years.
Yeah, and it's about understanding that, right? I do also want to tie it back into something you said earlier about the runway, the long runway. So I immediately thought of the last mile problem there. So if you remember, we even discussed this on the masterclass you attended last year in the case study presented by Francisco Rios from Microsoft Game Studios. So what is your approach to getting users invested in the building of the data-driven solutions and also to follow up once you've delivered the solution?
I mean, we probably shouldn't be engaged in a solution in my mind unless the business is committed to the change required to get the money. So the reason I'm already following, like I said, is sometimes you can deploy a model and you start counting the money the next day. If you put in a pricing model, you can start charging differently tomorrow and the money will start flowing tomorrow. With these solutions, right, think about it like you may have to train Frontline, you may have to educate folks. It may take a while to shift the boat. Like, cause this giant ship, sometimes there's a lot of stuff that has to change for us to make money. It may take a year to make the money after that. And I think the more clear that leadership understands that, to generally that is our advantage as well. Because you'll otherwise be like, well, that failed. I don't see, I still have just as many calls or I have just as many people doing X. I think trying to be really realistic about how long that implementation will take, and I don't mean the data implementation, but the business process change implementation, is a super important part of the story, because whether we like it or not, we will look like we have failed if they fail to do the business process change, right? Where's the finger going? It's going to me. And that's okay. But that means I want to sign up for stuff where I spend enough time with the business partner that they're dedicated to actually getting the thing implemented, and that they're actually going to send I'm much more confident in solutions where someone has decided to engage a team to do the change management. That gives me much more higher confidence. But that also means we might wait 6 months or a year to see the ROI start coming in.
Yeah. So that's all great. And, as I've mentioned, and as you probably know by now, we're the data storytellers. So I'd love to get your view on what role storytelling plays specifically in the context of your playbook. So there's a lot of hype about storytelling itself as well. Has your view on the subject evolved at all over the last few years? Have you seen like case studies of where it had a more of an impact, for example?
I actually think that is part that doesn't change regardless of what you're working in. I mean, sure, I think there's a little higher advantage to doing interpretable things in spaces where people have not seen a ton of data and machine learning yet, right? Of course, you should probably go for the simpler one. I think that power, though, of being able to translate what you have done into what is important to the business does not matter what kind of problem. You could be in any kind of problem set. It is vital, right? And so I think it's just as vital here. I don't know that maybe it's more important because you need to speak their language, but that skill, I mean, back to what I said before, which I like to remind my data scientists, we don't get paid to be smart, we get paid to be useful. And the further I progress in my career, the more I have to act like a business person and not like a technologist. And what does that mean? That means understanding the business strategy, understanding where we make money, and understanding how to tell the business that we are doing things that are helping you make money or meeting the priorities that are set out in your business strategy. That is not easy. It also means if you're a centralized or enterprise data science team, you get to know every part of the business, which is hard, right? We're not generally specialized to one. My last 3 roles have been enterprise-wide, meaning there isn't a line of business that I can sort of afford to ignore or not understand, because at some point I have to speak all their languages. And that's a hard learning curve. That's probably the biggest challenge of in my position.
Yeah, so interesting, because when we started the Data Storytellers in 2019, we never really conceptualized it in a way that's like the people talk about data storytelling today like a visualization service. It was always about how you leverage the power of influence, persuasion, and communication to make data analytics a foundational pillar of the business. And a lot of businesses are on their way to doing that now. So now it's kind of evolved into how do you become that ultimate data leader who bridges the gap between the business and the data side of things. So as we're getting deeper into the decade of data, and the landscape has changed a few times, it's not really slowing down. And we spoke about some of the new trends, but what do you say are the key challenges for corporate data leaders moving forward?
Living up to the hype. I actually say that, in all seriousness. I think, especially with the explosion of Gen AI, the belief that data and AI are going to revolutionize the world is becoming more and more popular, or it makes people more concerned that something's coming for them. It makes CEOs concerned that they're falling behind, even if the ROI, so I think it's, the job has probably gotten harder. So it's gotten higher visibility, which is good. But like I just said, all the problems that I would be tasked to solve with machine learning, for example, or AI that would hit a business process needs super high partnership from the business. And so living up to the expectation that cannot be met, I don't think by any data science data leader, any chief data analytics officer, is one that many face, which is, I'm just going to fund your team and the world's going to change, right? Like, you can't do that because you can't fly solo. You've got to have all of these other, right? Your data generators are the lines of business. Your implementers are the lines of business. So if they're not in lockstep with you on what you're actually going to accomplish, like, you cannot succeed. It's a team sport. It's just not a solo endeavor. If it's that important to the company strategy, then it has to be important to everyone's strategy in each line of the business. I think that's really hard. It takes a certain level of buy-in, I think, from super senior leadership to really capitalize on the value. Unless you're living in, at least in my Mickey Mouse version land, whatever it must be like to work at Amazon or Facebook, or one of the things where the data and analytics strategy is very clear, like we're always going to use data or Amazon or something. At any other company where data has not been central to the strategy and is only more recently coming, then that is a very hard task. And you really need either a full CEO kind of push or buy-in that data is going to be a differentiator, data and AI are going to be a differentiator for the company, or you really better make a lot of friends with the SLT or the executive leadership team, because you live and die, I think, by how well they cooperate with you on these.
Yeah, this is so interesting about the whole team sport, because something that caught my eye when you told me about the playbook was the actual role of the data science team. And both Laszlo and I have military backgrounds. So in the military, you have these rivalries between the units, between the infantry, between the logistics, between the radio guys, and it's all in the spirit of the team. But at the end of the day, everyone plays that really crucial role. So one question I would have for you would be about the team itself contributing to what you described as the education, the hand-holding, the training of the end users. First of all, what kind of level are we talking about here? And then secondly, how do you go about positioning those people, and the response you get as well, right? Like, are they interested to do that because they want the adoption? Are they kind of less so because it's not really the skill base they signed up for? Do you get a mixture of both camps?
Do a lot of data scientists want to go do training? No, they don't. But because it takes a certain personality to want to be the voice and be the storyteller. But you don't need everybody to do it, right? But you do need sufficient number who will do it. And so I have certainly, like I said, I've had cases where I've had data scientists just prepare the materials to help train the trainer, right? To train the frontline. I myself learned a lesson early in my career doing fraud modeling, where we actually went and trained people in the software. So we're training the caseworker that's actually going to use it. They don't care that there was a neural network behind there finding whatever, ID theft or, Medicaid fraud. But we were there to give them a user interface that would help them understand what to do with the case and why we chose that case, right? That they should review. These people don't have college degrees. I learned so many lessons training those people and it made me a such better data scientist. Because I was sitting there talking to my end user. And so I like to encourage my team that I think the most meaningful thing to do at work, it's not very fun to build prototypes that go nowhere. It's a lot more fun to build stuff that people use. And we are going to be all hands on deck if we need to be to make it something that people use. No, I'm not removing you from your day job. And the business has to be willing, but certainly if the business ever asks us to help or we can suggest ways and that would increase adoption, I am generally all on board. I will find that one data scientist who loves to talk and I'll go put them out there. It is not all data scientists and we need all kinds. So that's not a criticism either. But there's usually one or two that will do it. And I think it's a worthy investment of time if it gets a solution over the line into adoption.
And today in your playbook, it's very top down from your level. I was curious because you mentioned there that if you don't have the C-level buy-in, it's way more difficult. So I'd love to know your experiences throughout your career about the level of CEO buy-in and maybe how you've tried to circumvent that.
I feel like you're making me air on my dirty laundry. I just read this Forbes article about the rise of the chief AI officer. And I was like, yep, that's it. Because why? And I'll tell you why. Because I think without that level of buy-in, it is an uphill climb. It is generally an uphill climb. Once in a while, you get someone who's excited. The other uphill climb which you're facing at that point is the build versus buy decision. You'll have every vendor. You have every vendor at your door. And they're out at your business partners' doors. And I used to be a little anti calling everything AI because if you actually know, then you know the difference. Vendors will call anything AI. I would too. That's what they're trying to sell, right? They're going to sell a correlation coefficient as AI if you're not careful. So what I love about that chief AI officer, which I think is compelling to me, is that is someone who has responsibility for both the build and the buy decision. So what should an enterprise data science or AI team be doing? And what should we just be buying from vendors because it's fast to breed and it's not a differentiator for us, for example, right? You need a strategy around how you're going to use AI and what you believe that you should build internally and what you should go out and market and buy. And that is super hard to do if you are somewhere sitting below. If you are too far from the CEO, you are not going to be able to dictate to those other businesses what they build or buy. But if you have a seat at that table, then it's still a job of influence and still a job of politics. But if you have the backing to say, we're going to be really smart about how we use AI in this company, if you have that level of CEO investment, like I feel like that would be, this is a carrot and stick operation, you would have a pretty good stick. But in the cases where it's not, then again, I just go back to being like, well, what can we do that's impactful? We cannot do everything for everybody. So how can we choose our R&D and how can we choose our project to the extent that sometimes we don't get to choose our project portfolio, but to the extent that I get to prioritize what my team works on from an R&D perspective, I'm absolutely going to work on it with the willing business partners, and I'm going to be way less likely to sign up for something where I don't feel like I have enough sponsorship from the business to get it over the line. I'll put those on hold until I find that sponsorship. I like to prioritize our time where I think it has a reasonable chance to succeed. And usually that's not about whether we succeed, but we're about whether the business can succeed in implementing it.
And yeah, it's really good that you broke it down, the difference between like the CDO, CDAO and the CAIO, which isn't as catchy, but it will catch on, as you said. It's just kind of like the vowels rolling off the tongue.
Yeah.
Maybe like Chief AI MLO, CML AIO. Something like this would be more, no, it would be CAIMLO. That's kind of like rolls a bit better because it spaced out the vowels. Anyway, any company that wants to take me up on that, that's now trademark, that's copyright, so I will be taking a commission on that. But actually, with that then, what would you say are the qualities of the ideal CAIO? It's a very loaded question that you've just given to me, so I can't be blamed for that. But I'd be interested to know what you think the difference is, the different qualities that are required of those different roles, the CDO and the CAIO, or what you anticipate that might be.
Could be like the unicorn data scientist. We have to know everything. I think it has to be a technologist somewhere rooted, like they have to have a technology background because otherwise you won't know when you're getting snowed in your build versus buy decisions. I think you do have to have some technical depth. But you must also be an influencer, a storyteller. You've really got to set out the vision for the company. You've got to convince probably a lot of very high-powered people why they should do what you sell, even if the CEO is backing you, right? These are not dictatorships generally, and so I think it's a super interesting job. I think it'd be a very difficult job, but very interesting. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. I think that the way that the industry seems to be bifurcated right now, it'll be interesting to see where it comes out of, is your CTO may feel that they have that role already. Your chief data analytics officer may also feel that they have that role already.
CIO.
I'm not a CEO, so I am not going to pick one. I'm not going to venture opinion. But I think that will be interesting. I think that the tension between the CTO and the chief data analytics officer today is for real. Right? It's like pool and spot. Like, I think that's still getting worked out. I don't know that there are any right or wrong answers about that, Ken. It's just about kind of understanding what you're trying to accomplish and what the strategy of the company is. Like, what do you expect to get out of the data that you are generating?
And I already see like where some of these this could actually bring problems, right? Because most organizations will have a CIO, now a CDO or a CDAO. Now there's got what do they call it in America? Patent pending, CML AIO. Now there are these three guys who are on the C-level, but they're all responsible for the end-to-end data. So how do you go about, formulating that into the business without kind of shoehorning it in, and which is probably a problem for me to ask you about maybe in a year or two.
That's for the CEO to decide. That's above my pay grade.
Alrighty. So you mentioned Amazon as well. It's like just when you've been doing your comparisons between, these tech native companies and then the more traditional companies that are now incorporating data. So based on those previous experiences, and this is again another loaded question, but how do you go about defining when a company becomes and crosses the line to data driven? And maybe not to the level of the Amazons, because if you're not a tech native, it's going to be hard to really get there, maybe. But actually going from a point where, like you said, everything's in binders under someone's desk to the data drivenness. When does that come about for you?
I think it's kind of hard to measure the KPI. One of them is money. So for sure, if you are revenue generating, and no, you can't take all the credit for that as the data team, but if your pricing models are generating money, or you've created all these efficiencies in the business by automating processes, for sure there's some tipping point where a large enough percentage of the money being generated by that company is being data driven. That feels like a good tipping point. Culturally, though, there's a different one. This one is harder to measure, which is, I think, how often are we making gut decisions and how often are we making data-driven decisions, right? How pervasive are people using data? How high is the data quality? Do people trust the data? Those are a little harder to get at, but I think a company that's data-driven has high data availability, high quality data, and good tooling for folks to use that data in ways that make their job better, right? Like, everybody agrees on the same metrics. For example, you see that in companies all the time. They don't. There's a different metric for every line of business, and they don't match. And so just I think you want to see super high maturity on that side. And because guess what? Data quality sort of doesn't alone generate revenue, but it is part of the revenue generating machine. So, but I haven't really worked for a totally data-driven company yet. So
that's your niche or USP.
My niche is the other kind. No. I think I've always been working on that transition, right? And so I'd only have the perspective of someone who's not quite made it yet.
And to be fair, I think those companies are going to be around for a very long time. So I think you're pretty good there.
Yeah, no, they were making money some other way before we got here, right?
Exactly.
And I'm super respectful of that.
And that kind of underpins your whole point, right? Is about the data team not coming in to do a massive overhaul, but coming in to support the pre-existing model. If you, this is probably out the scope of like data-driven business transformation, but if you look at, for example, WeWork, it's a company that never really had a core business model, and you've seen what's potentially happening there. So If you come in with these big ideas as a data leader, even as a business leader, if you're pitched on these ideas of AI being the next big thing and it doesn't materialize, you lose the trust, and then you don't move with the times. So I think that kind of underpins your whole playbook. And thank you so much for sharing that. So much for us to think about and go on there.
Yeah.
One last question I have. What would be your word of advice for the data leaders of the future who are looking to shape the future of the profession?
I think it's actually the same as my playbook in one particular way. I think it sounds fun to walk in somewhere and be like, we're going to change the world with AI, right? You think that's why you've been hired and you haven't. So I think the number one piece of advice still is that humility, especially if you're working in an industry or a field or a company where data has been important, but there's still somewhere in that data maturity curve. Humility is your best friend. Because like I said, these people have been making enough money to hire you for a long time before you got there. So you need to walk into those business leaders trying to figure out how to help them capitalize on their strategy, which they know better than you. And be viewed much more, I think, as a partner than as this is not a winner-take-all situation. I mean, that sounds fun. I don't think that job exists. So, or sounds easier if it was just you, right? But it's not. It's such a team sport. I think coming in at that really humble view of where does this company make money today? What is my place in making some of that better? And also, what's not my place? This is super important. And that's where you focus on, right? What's your place? And just try to get some of those wins across the board. I have heard of someone who has set up their data and analytics practice as a actual revenue P&L, which means they have to be really disciplined about how you measure the ROI from your models. But it wouldn't surprise me if we could get to that place as companies get more mature, that we could point to data and data science and say, we're making this much money on AI, or we saved this much money on AI. I think that'd be a great place to be sitting. But again, it's a team sport. You won't do that alone. The business has to do some stuff too.
Absolutely. Exuding a lot of humility there, Jodi, and absolutely appreciate you coming on the show, and pleasure to speak to you. Pleasure to hear more about, your actual model for doing this kind of stuff. And look, I'm sure we'll speak again in the future on this as well.
Oh, thank you for having me. I think my playbook changes every year because you learn more and you update your own thinking. And so, I might have additions as I learn, especially with Gen AI. I think we're all trying to come up with that playbook and it's not written yet.
Awesome stuff. Well, yeah, again, thanks for coming on the show and look forward to chatting soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul.